I'll be running through a project that we've been undertaking for the past few years now, really, at Nestle. As you say, focused on health, wellness, and absence. So, just a quick introduction. I'll let Katie introduce herself as well. So, my name's Harry. I am a people analyst for Nestle for the zone EMENA. I've been working at Nestle for a few years now, 4 or 5 years. All of that time in people analytics. Katie, I don't know if you just want to do a quick introduction as well.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Katy Bowers. I have worked at Nestle now for around 10 years in a number of roles, and spent the last few in the people analytics team, first in the UK and then more recently for the zone. And as Harry mentioned, we're here today to talk about health, wellness, and absence analytics, but we've both worked across a number of other topics as well.
Cool. So just to get started, I'm sure most people have probably heard of Nestle. We're quite a big company. We employ over 300,000 people over many countries, lots of different sites, lots of different types of work, factory work, office work, all kinds of things. And with a lot of different teams, lots of different products, lots of different brands going on. It's a big and complicated organization. Going into that complexity side, as I said, me and Katie both work within the zone, which means we're working across global projects across lots of different countries. And the best way to describe Nestle, I found that I found quite funny, was simple complexity. We have lots of different layers to Nestle. We have the global view, what happens at Nestle overall. We have businesses that are managed globally within streams. We have different countries. We have different zones. Along all of these different areas are different initiatives, different policies, different targets, and KPIs. Obviously, there's a lot of alignment between them all, but we work within that. So when I'm going to run through some of this health and wellness project that we've done, it's worth keeping in mind that we do this from a case of we want to apply it to as many places as we can, as many countries and markets as we can, and it's a general framework that we've pulled together. So jumping straight into health and wellness, I just want to start on why I chose this, or why we chose this as something to look at: health, wellness, and absence. There is one very obvious answer to that, which is health and wellness has never really felt more relevant. I don't think it's obviously with the current health crisis happening at the moment, it's important, but beyond that as well, it's around our flexibility to react to what's happening around us in health and wellness. It's around really challenging our comfort and understanding of data in this area as well, enough to make decisions based on that. Something that is happening a lot at the moment and will happen more and more, I'm sure. But also as a bit of a reaction to what's going on as well. It feels as though we're going through something of a change around things like work-life balance, and employee, how people feel with the current situation, especially if you're in a country who is experiencing lockdown at the moment. So yeah, it feels very relevant at the moment. Something that needs that data overview to make strong decisions on. Another reason that we've chosen it is that it's just full of really interesting data. So I think this is the case for a couple of reasons. The first of all, I think there's loads of information here that doesn't necessarily get used that much, from what I've seen across lots of businesses. It's a bit of a hidden gem, and we definitely found that when we looked at it. There's so much information and so much value in the data, but often it's the case that it's a bit disparate or a bit messy or anything like that, and it's I guess it's the case of showing that it's worth looking into and it's worth using. And the second reason I think it's really interesting is because it's obviously um, one of the more uh, locked down data sets in terms of privacy, and it really needs something of a moral lens over it when more than most others, I feel. So when we're looking at absence data, at wellness data, absence particularly, I think it's very important to remember at every stage that what you're looking at is people, what you're looking at is a data point that represents someone who is going through potentially something very difficult at the time. So I think that it's a very interesting project to look at because of how grounded it needs to be in people too. And then the other reason is just because we learned a lot. So it was just a really valuable experience for us. It was a really long-term project, so we've been running it for years, really, intermittently. So going back into it, and back into it, back into it, and we've learned an awful lot over that period of time. How to, effectively sharing data, how we use different levels of detail of different groups of people, and something I think's been great from this has been what's kind of happened with the information that we've shared. So because it's been such a long-term project, we've seen some great outcomes, um, and that was something that I wanted to get across in this and highlight how that's happened. So I'm going to run through the work that we did, what we looked at, how we started, and sort of key learnings and that kind of thing. Just as a obvious but necessary point, I'm not going to share any real data, even aggregated. It's not real. It is representative of the kind of things we looked at, the theories that we followed, but for obvious reasons, I won't be sharing anything that is what really happened. So for a starting point, I wanted to kick off with how we approached it. So there are three main perspectives that we wanted to go from to approach this project, which are all connected, but quite different. So the first one, which is the most important one and is 100% starting place, is around employee wellness. Obviously, a constant task for Nestle as a company is to ensure that everyone who works at Nestle is happy and healthy. This was the number one concern going in. It was the core aspect of the project. And we wanted to see absence, health, and wellness from an employee journey perspective. If I'm an employee at Nestle, we want to know the insights around how someone went through that absence journey. The other aspect to this is cost. Obviously, cost is a very important thing when it comes to things like absence. It's a very big number. I have found that it's generally a largely hidden cost, and therefore a real opportunity to showcase how, if you're working in this area, if you're working around absence, you can highlight the value that's being delivered. It's a really helpful for something that everybody wants, which is ROI, return on investment. It's really great for that, and it's also very accessible. It's really hidden, but it's not hard to get to. So I'm going to go through how we kind of went to that. And then the third aspect of this was we know it's a rising problem. So we knew that absence was growing everywhere, not limited to Nestle, and we wanted to get just ahead of the problem really, as much as we could. And we also knew that it was a changing landscape as well. So we wanted to make sure we were ahead of the curve. We knew that yesterday's problems aren't the same as tomorrow's, and we wanted to get to tomorrow before tomorrow, if that makes sense. So just to kick off from where we were at our starting point. So when we started this project, we had obviously absence was important to the business, but in terms of what we were doing with data, it was more on the absence side and less on the health and wellness side. That's probably the natural progression for a lot of people, a lot of companies. It's that's where the data is there. It's just there. Let's report on it. Great. So we had an internally built absence system, which was designed to give business partners, people in HR, wellness teams, access to information on absence percentages. But the thing about this is that it's very much an operational tool. So we have lists of people who are absent. We have, are you hitting your target? Yes or no, that kind of thing. So lots of red is bad, green is good, and reactive generally rather than proactive. We were looking at what's happened so far this year. Why was last month above target, that kind of thing. And it also relies more on the basic absence data set, that information. So we're looking at the numbers of percentages and things rather than why people are absent. What are the health and wellness policies that are happening at the same time? It's more who's off and how long. So from this point, we got together with a really wide group of people, impacts so many people. So obviously business partners who are on the ground and facing this with people, occupational health teams, health and wellness policymakers, those kind of groups, and decided that we could definitely do more with it. So it was the conversation really is how do we get from your absence percentage is this to your absence percentage is this, but it's driven by this cause, particularly affecting this group of people, and these are some really effective solutions to take care of that. We wanted to, I guess, empower the stakeholders who are actually there on the ground and they're making decisions with the information, the definitive information to either challenge or support what they already thought. Um, yeah, so I'm just going to go through a few of the topics that we covered and how we covered them. It's a bit more of the practical side now. So the first one I'm just going to go through is we looked at costs. So I pulled some information before this on the actual cost of absence or the estimated cost of absence where I'm from in the UK. The estimated cost of absence in the UK is about £14 billion. This is a big number, and what I found, and I'm sure if others do this, they'll find the same, is that if you calculate this in your market, you will also find, or in your business, you will also find that there is a big number there lurking just beneath the surface. You know it as percentages, but percentages are, or you may know it as percentages, but percentages are perhaps not as impactful or as they don't really give you the scale. So we wanted something that would help us to define the scale of absence in the UK. We wanted something that would give us an idea of how much it was compared with other similar problems that maybe people focused on. It was a big win in terms of the numbers that were produced. It's a really attention-grabbing number. It's really, really helpful. And it's actually really simple. I kind of mentioned earlier, it's a really simple thing to do. It can be anyway. You can make it as simple or as complicated as you want to, but there is a really accessible way to get into this. So one very simple way, which was kind of our starting point in this, that we looked at this, was by employee. We looked at the annual number of days lost through absence, and we multiply this by annual salary. And all you've got there is just a basic lost salary calculation. It's really simple to do, but you multiply that up and you aggregate that up to parts of the business or the business as a whole, and you start to see the scale and the size of some of these absence issues in like financial format, which is really, really powerful. It doesn't take long at all if you've got the data. Really easy to calculate, and it's really helpful. And it also helps you to we found using these kind of financial figures again and again and again, it really helped us to put things into context later on. So if we could attribute basic value to the work that we were doing. So if we were to say, the work that we were doing is going to reduce absence by X% or by X amount of days or anything like that, we can instead say that we're going to reduce absence and it's going to save this much money as well, which is a really, really nice thing to have. Even though, as I say, obviously the core point of this is around employee wellness, it's nice to see too. There are, as I say, more complicated ways of doing this. Lots of things feed into cost of absence. There's overtime, there's productivity loss, there's cover work, there's loads of things that can go into this. And as I say, depending on the data you've got available, it can be as complicated or as simple as you want. But yeah, it's a very interesting exercise to do. The second thing that we looked at was around cause, around the drivers, and you can go through this however you want to, whatever data you've got available and that kind of thing. But it's helped us to kind of define what were the main issues and what were the main drivers. As I said, everything on here is not actual data, it's just representative of the kind of things that we looked at. But there's lots of different things you can look at or that we looked at. So how much is long-term versus short-term absence? If we're going to focus on cutting absence down overall as a broader picture, then do we focus on short-term or long-term? People have preconceptions in this area already. it might be that you speak to people and they say, yeah, actually, we think we're focusing a lot on driving down like these people who are coming in and having a few days off and coming back in. We don't want that, so we're going to drive that down. But actually, that might be a really small impact. It might be actually if you help one person who's on a long-term absence and focus resource on there, you're going to have a bigger impact overall, and that's where we need to be. So it was about a fully data-driven, unbiased look at that kind of information. But then there's loads of things to look at. We looked at certain jobs or types of work more prone to absence. There's this factory work, and my job as an analyst, they're very different roles, and obviously suffer from very different health, wellness, absence issues. What were the actual reasons behind absence? So, for example, mental health issues like stress, illness issues like flus, if it could be musculoskeletal and like physical issues. How much is work related? How much is directly avoidable as a case of work? Are certain demographics affected differently to others? So if you are younger or older, or you have, or male or female, or whatever that might be, how much is things like mental health absences or musculoskeletal absences related to those demographics differently? The next kind of part of information that we looked at, the next slide that we looked at was how is this changing over time? So from a lens of we know where we are now, and we know how big the problem is now. We know what the drivers are, and we know who it's impacting. So we can pretty well plot the trajectory of that absence impact in wherever we were looking. So has it been getting better or worse from now? And what's driving that? Is there seasonality? One of the really interesting ones that we looked at was based on changing demographics of your business. How can we expect it to change? So we've looked at, if we've looked at the drivers up to now, and we've looked at the impact on different groups of people up to now, we can then say, okay, so this group of people is getting bigger and bigger, and they are more adversely impacted by this kind of absence, so we can expect that to grow over time. If you boil it down to that kind of concept, it's quite easy to approach. So as an example of that, not real, but as an example of that, you could know that musculoskeletal injuries, for example, are related to age. The older you are, the more likely you are to have a musculoskeletal injury. We know that our workforce age is declining, maybe getting younger, and so we know that musculoskeletal injuries are going to go down. So we should probably expect that for the future. So we're starting to get a bit of a picture now of what our future is going to look like in this space, with some sort of basic predictions. There are ways you can definitely build on this with more statistical methodologies, but you can go a long way with some fairly straightforward concepts. The last kind of topic I want to talk about is around interventions. So we've talked about cost, and we've talked about like drivers and causes, and we've talked about assessing the future based on that. So what might happen later on. So now it's around, okay, so what are we doing to help? What is that working? Is that the best thing for the future? And we're starting to get more into the proactive piece here, and this is where we saw some great successes coming out of this. So currently, you can look at how effective are our health policies and systems at the moment. Are they fit for purpose? Do they work as well as they can? Are they aimed at the right people for the right kind of problems? If you have demographics of people who are impacted by specific injuries or absences, maybe you need a system to communicate to those people what toolkits they have available, resources they have available, what's best for them. So if it's an older generation that may not, maybe in factories, that may not be as used to like online resources, then it's about joining those bits together. How good are implementation and communication through business partners and line managers of these policies and of the systems that we have, like occupational health? Are our line managers referring in the right way? Is that what's happening, or is it problems elsewhere? And we can also start looking at which interventions are starting to have a quantifiable impact on absence. And again, build on that even further and start touching on ROI, which is really, really valuable when it starts coming to things like wellness strategies. So we can see that there is a cost of implementing this specific intervention, but actually we know that intervention is not the one that we need for 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, because this is a growing problem here. It could be, you're looking at mental health, for example. We know that's going to be a growing problem in the next few years. We know that's going to get bigger and bigger, but our interventions are aimed at today's problems. So we're going to have people who are coming through with maybe mental health issues, or absences, who need a different layer of support than what we're currently giving them. So it's about getting ahead of that. And like I say, if we can drop our ROI on top of that as well, that's just a really great way for or great tool for the wellness team and health and wellness groups particularly, because we can start talking about, it's going to be a worthwhile thing to do there, financially as well, which is great. And here's the impact on absence. So these are the different kind of topics that we looked at and the way that we approached them. It was a bit more of a practical dive down into how that worked. I just want to now just take a step back to talk a bit more about the key learnings that we had as a result of sharing all of this, because there was some really interesting things that came off the back of sharing a lot of this information. And I appreciate it's a fairly high level overview, but it was hopefully get across some of the outcomes here. So some of our key learnings, some of the main ones. So we had, the first one was about it being attention grabbing. So one of the big parts of this project was about spreading the message of absence. If it didn't filter down in the right way, so what the drivers were, what the future might look like, if it didn't filter down to places to like factories and sites, or different areas of the business, or even upwards, then it wasn't going to have the same impact. So a big focus on this was on visuals and shareability. And from this, we went ahead and started building infographics based on this. Probably the most work we've done on infographics up to that point on any project. I think the thing around infographics, it can sometimes feel a bit unnecessary, and like you don't have the time to do it. But my experience in this is that it's 100% worth the time. If you can give yourself a bit of time to think about the key parts of your project and pull it into an infographic, a one pager, that is a glance over and you get it, it's so worth it. The reshare value of that was priceless. The next thing that was a great key output of this was engaging people with the analytics and the data. We spoke to a lot of people with some of this message. Again, like I say, a big part of this was spreading the message, and it was really nice to be able to take people away from percentages and build up from employee journey to the amount of absence that people were feeling through things like long-term and musculoskeletal injuries in this area and things like that. It really helped color in the picture for a lot of people. And as a result, I've seen off the back of this quite a lot of people who are now a lot more comfortable using absence data and going into that a bit more on a high level and tying it into the wider business view. And we've certainly seen a lot of a recurrence of this, a lot of questions coming back and back and back, and people wanting to know more and more and more, which is great. On that point, it's been really great as a project. One of the most important things as a point of this is we followed up a lot for outcomes. So we revisit this topic quite a lot. It's been going on for quite a few years, and you can really see the progress that's being made based on the initial work that was done. So if going back to some of the work we did at the start about predicting what was going to happen in the future and forecasting 3, 4, 5 years ahead, I can look at that timeline now, and I can see, because we went back again and again and kept looking at it, I can see what we predicted would change, what actually changed, what interventions were put in place to tackle that change before it happened, and then I can see the outcomes of what those interventions did. I can see that we said this will be a problem in a few years' time. I can see that the business said, okay, so we put in place this intervention to stop it, and I can see where the high uptake of that kind of intervention has been the real measurable impact that you had on specific types of absences that would have been a real problem. So it was been very good to do it as a long-term project and keep revisiting. So I would say the key learning there is going back again and again and again. And the last key learning that I've had from this is it's about how we've effectively challenged views. It did a really good job of that. So a lot of people can hold a pre-existing opinion about what is going on, and looking at the data was a really great way of cracking that if it maybe wasn't right, or if it was just slightly off or slightly misleading, or even supporting people's preconceptions if they have them. It's not necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, so it was about getting everyone on the same page and getting rid of some of those pre-existing conceptions about absence and about health. And from there, I'm going to take a breather. It's probably a good idea. And yeah, thank you for listening. If you have any questions.